What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel. Special guest today, Fabian Ardaya, covering the Dodgers for The Athletic, joining us. We're going to talk trade deadline, of course. But first, Fabian, how you doing? I mean, beat writers, you're 100 games into the season, middle of summer. We doing all right over there?
It's the trade deadline week, so I don't think anyone necessarily is doing all right, but we're hanging in there.
Yeah, I imagine like the 2 weeks after the trade deadline, is that like the hardest stretch just because it's like there's not really any breaking news, sort of crazy excitement, and yet you're still like it feels like months away from the season being over?
Yeah, those were dog days where it's
Yeah.
sort of like like the division's not gonna be settled those 2 weeks. There's not really any trades being made. Like it's sort of catching your breath if you can after the deadline.
Yeah, I love it. Well, again, I appreciate you joining us. Let's start big picture. As we sit here today, the Dodgers are 15 games over 500. They've got a 3-game lead in the division. They're 4 games up on the last wild card spot. They have lost 3 of 4, though. So I'm curious for you, and this is kind of maybe a difficult question, but if you could kind of sum up the Dodgers season, maybe it's a word, maybe it's a phrase, how you're feeling about things at this moment. What word or phrase would you choose?
Not how I expected it. I
Okay.
think everyone kind of expected. I think it's safe to assume like they expected this kind of record. Like this is
Yeah.
sort of what they were projected to be at, if not a little bit better. Just the way it's all transpired is definitely different than expected. They were expected to lean on their pitching to sort of make up for the position player side, introducing some of the young guys on the position player side. It's been kind of the opposite. The offense has kind of carried the pitching staff. Pitching
Yeah.
staff's been the one that's been having so many young players sort of have to come in and take on bigger roles than expected. It's certainly not how anyone kind of envisioned this Dodgers team like playing day to day, but the actual, if you if you take like a 10,000 feet view up, like if you saw they were like 15 games above 500 in first place on July 27th, you'd say they're in a pretty good spot. Everything pretty much went okay.
Yeah, it is interesting because I think that's a pretty fair assessment of like at the end of the day, 3 games up in the division, 15 games above 500. Like people would have taken that. I know there were lots of skeptics coming into the season about, how they would look compared to their win total. And it feels like they're pretty much right on pace for, the low to mid 90s win total. And yet, as you said, there's a lot of young guys playing. Some of the young guys that we kind of assumed were safer bets to perform well haven't performed well. Some of the young guys that were, in AA to begin the year have maybe performed a little bit better than others. You've got the Syndergaard signing that backfires right after the Tyler Anderson signing of a year ago, kind of was like the perfect thing. So just a weird deal. I'm curious, like the thing on my end, we interact obviously with a lot of fans. Fans, as you know, are not always the most balanced, rational at times. They are called fanatics for a reason. It feels like when I interact with fans, there's kind of an unfair comparison that this team doesn't get compared to the Braves and the Phillies and the Padres and the Giants. The 2023 Dodgers tends to get compared to the 2022 Dodgers, which was one of the best regular season teams literally of all time. And because of that, even though they're 3 games up, even though they have a 15 game above 500 record, it feels like there's sort of a general disappointment, even if maybe relative to the rest of the league, there shouldn't be. My question is that the thing I wanted to ask you is, does that kind of exist in the locker room, in the front office? Like, is there sort of a disappointment with this team, even though they're kind of right where everybody expected them to be?
I don't think so. Not in the clubhouse or the front office. I think everyone kind of understood where the projection systems had them. Kind of understood like what this club was. Understood what they lost. I know they said that obviously they're able to move past some of the stuff they lost. But like you lose Corey Seager and Trey Turner in consecutive years, like that's going to obviously take a toll. And it's not just last year's Dodgers team. Like
Yeah.
they haven't had a season like with this low of a winning percentage since 2018. I would still
Yeah.
team not made to the World Series, but like you look at every single full season since then, it's at least 106 wins. The one that they didn't win 106 games was 2020. They won the World Series. So like this has been a really dominant run. And this is still a really good team. Is it the juggernaut in the regular season that last year's team was? No. I mean, that's because they won more games than any team in Dodger franchise history, and more games than teams won the National League in I think since the 30s or something like that. Like the crazy
Yeah.
run differential. Like that was a really good team that just did perform well in October. I mean, this is still a good team. I mean, it's still a team that's going to get to the dance. Like they probably for the 11th year in a row, they're probably going to make the playoffs. And I think the questions and concerns are fair about like what that team looks like once you get to October. Like there's genuine concerns about like the rotation. There's so many concerns about whether or not the bullpen's gonna be good enough to be part of an October sort of lineup. But I mean, they're still going to get there. So that's the biggest thing that they're kind of balancing.
I want to save my specific trade deadline questions for a minute from now, but do you sense, is there any hesitation from the front office to kind of make a run at it this year? Like, is there any, I mean, and I know they always want to be balanced and they've got to, navigate prospects and long-term and yada, yada, yada. Like, is there any hesitation compared to previous years about the confidence in this group, their ability to go win a World Series where maybe they might be slightly less aggressive than they have been?
I mean, I don't know if it's hesitation or what. Like, I don't think there's like a big Darvish Machado level guy to
Yeah.
go out and get. I think that's the bigger thing. Like, I think they'll be aggressive in the sense that, like, they have a lot of holes and they know they have to fill them, as opposed to would like to fill them like in
Yeah.
previous years where they can sort of wait out value, take a flyer on someone like Joey Gallo and hope that maybe his ceiling hits. This year they kind of have to make the type of moves like they have already, where it's sort of like guys who can, at the very minimum, just raise the depth of the roster, as opposed to in years past, they already kind of had the depth and they want to add on the top. So I think that sort of changes things a little bit, but I think they were always going to add, and they obviously have added already, but I don't think they're necessarily going to push their chips in for a guy who's not on that level, superstar level guy. And that's understandable. That's sort of how they've always gone about going after value and stuff like that at the deadline. And obviously, we'll see how what they do this deadline sort of impacts this winter and what they sort of want to pursue. But they love having options to be able to always have enough resources to add whenever there's a big superstar out there.
Yeah, Andrew Friedman would love that you talked about optionality there. We know that's his
I didn't say the
phrase.
word. I talked around it because
you said options.
I wrote about optionality, and then at the winter meetings, he brought it up, and he said, someone wrote about that recently. And looked at me, I was like, he reads.
Love it. I love it. And that's circling back to the aggressive piece. I think that's what makes this so tricky is the Dodgers are ultimately going to be judged by what they do. While people like, me, most fans, we don't know what they tried to do. And so we can look and say, oh man, they weren't aggressive enough. When in reality, they might have been super aggressive and they might have just been outbid by teams that overpaid in their estimation, or there might not have been a fit. That's sort of the tricky piece of this whole thing. And those are the moments when I don't envy the life of a beat reporter who kind of has to stand in that middle ground of maybe knowing more than the rest of us about how aggressive they were, and yet trying to talk to fans that probably can't be talked off of the ledge of being disappointed if all they want to do is be disappointed. So I recognize that this is probably a difficult season for folks who are kind of in that middle ground. Let me shift gears a little bit. I want to play a game with you that we like to play here called Buying or Selling. And basically, I'll name a player, and you tell me if right now, are you buying this player's stock or are you selling this player's stock? And this can be you personally, if you've got any sort of organizational insight about how the Dodgers might feel about this player, we would love to have you include that as well. But I'm kind of focusing on obviously the more polarizing players, the players who might have a wider range of outcomes here. So we'll ease into this one. Julio Urías, like he's a 5 ERA guy right now. I'm not talking about long-term contracts or any of that. For the next 2 or 3 months, are you buying Julio Urías as a guy who can improve, or is this just the guy the Dodgers are going to get for the next few months?
The Dodgers are banking that he is. I don't think, like I said before, there's not really that level of guy with Julio's track record available at the deadline. Obviously, they're expecting a Clayton Kershaw back, but obviously, still, even if Kershaw's healthy going into October, it's Julio Urias and Clayton Kershaw at the top of your rotation right now, and there's still some question marks behind it. So you're looking at that. You kind of have to hope that Julio Urias figures it out. You kind of pointed to that last start where kind of had to grind his teeth and get through 6 innings and give up 3 runs. He kind of pointed to that as a positive thing, just because he said that he's kind of let some of those moments and innings spiral on him this year, which has been the case. And normally hasn't been the case with Julio Urias. You kind of watch him start over the last few years, even when he gets hit by usually solo homers, he usually is able to reset, lock back in, and get right back going with his outing. This year, for whatever reason, they've spiraled a lot more. So that's been a big thing. That's obviously been an issue for the Dodgers and for Julio. But he still is a guy who last 2 full seasons has gotten Cy Young votes, 20-game winner in 21, and led the league in ERA last year. Like, there's obviously like reason to believe in him.
Yeah.
Obviously, we just haven't seen it this year.
Do you have any sense of, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, obviously they're not doing, there's no contract negotiations happening right now, but like before the season, were the Dodgers prepared to kind of let this play out because maybe they wanted to see how this year went? Were there real contract negotiations between the two sides and no agreement was reached? Like where were those two at? I'm just curious if that kind of played a role in where he's at today.
I don't think the contract really did. I think everyone kind of understood like Julio Urias was going to go to free agency. Obviously, the Dodgers have interest in bringing it back, but there's a lot of stuff that's in play this winter that they had to figure out. But just understanding sort of Julio Urias, like the type of free agent he can be at his age and stuff like that. Like, it's understandable to want to hit free agency, just to know that what is out there and understand what possibilities are out there, especially when he's going to be the best starting pitcher like pure starting pitcher on the market.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's move to another starting pitcher that is struggling, maybe not with quite as high of expectations as Julio Urías, but maybe a guy that the Dodgers need just as much as Julio Urías. That's Tony Gonsolin. Another rough start again for him this week. He keep giving up earned runs. This is a guy who, for his career, the ERA had been great, and it was a pretty decent size sample. And yet, if you look at some of the underlying metrics, they never liked him quite as much as his actual ERA. It feels like if you were pointing to metrics and saying regression, this year has sort of felt like the regression. Where are the Dodgers at on Gonsolin? Is there I mean, we know what they're hoping for. Is there optimism that he's going to figure this out, or is there sort of resigning themselves to, this is just who we've got right now?
That's why I'm most curious to see in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, is like, obviously like he kind of raised the expectations for himself last year with what he was able to do. Because it wasn't just that he was able to have a low ERA, because he's done that before. It was the way he was able to do it. It was limiting base runners for the first time.
Yeah.
It was being efficient, being able to go deep in outings. He's kind of regressed into sort of what he was before that, whereas a lot of base runners, a lot of navigating traffic. And whereas earlier in his career, he was still really good at the run prevention part of it, where he was able to sort of get out of jams. This swing and miss was able to sort of help him avoid some real damage. You're seeing outings like yesterday, where even as he gritted his way through 4 2/3, then he serves up an 0-2 splitter for a 3-run homer that kind of dampens the outing. So, I mean, he hasn't been able to avoid the big swing. The stuff is still there. It seems like it's rebounded the last couple starts after seemed like really concerning for how low the velocity kind of dropped in recent starts before that. Just sometimes starting at like 89, 90, and then ramping up to like 92, 93 over the course of starts. Last couple starts with a little bit better when it comes to velocity. But yeah, I mean, he's sort of gone back to like what he was before last year, where it comes to just nibbling, just sort of trying to live on the edges of the strike zone. And there's been a lot of base runners as a result.
Yeah. So I realized I've gotten away from my game here. I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Julio Urias, are you buying a bounce back for Julio the next 3 months?
I'd say yes, just because the track record.
Okay.
Obviously, it's been a tough year for him, but I'm betting on track record with him.
Okay, Gonsolin, same thing?
That is sort of wait and see. I sort of like wait and see mode with that, just because obviously, like, the stuff is still good and it's ticked back up recently, but it's just about if he's going to be in the strike zone enough and aggressive enough in the strike zone to be effective.
Okay, let's go positive. A guy who's on the upward trajectory. That's James Outman, a rookie who absolutely tore things up to begin the season, had a horrific slump that made you question everything that I believed about James Outman for the first couple months. Seems to have figured some things out the last month. Are you buying the uptick for James Outman?
I'm buying James Outman's season line being what he is.
Okay.
I think he's going to be a guy who, you sort of looked at his profile threat this time in the minors. A lot of power, sort of a solid defensive center fielder, able to play multiple positions, good runner, good athlete, a lot of swing and miss to his game. I think what you've seen the last couple of weeks is sort of cutting down on that swing and miss, sort of evolving that approach a little bit, like being able to shorten up, being able to use the whole field, maybe dial back that power just a tick, but still obviously able to get to it, as you saw when he was able to climb the wall in Baltimore. But yeah, I mean, I think if you sort of looked at his season from like 10,000 feet view, like that, this batting line is basically what you were hoping for out of him, especially if
Yeah.
he's playing center field, especially he's probably going to be playing mostly against right-handed pitching, especially with some of the moves the Dodgers have already made. I think the Dodgers can't help but be content with what James Outman's given them, even though obviously I'm sure they weren't expecting him to OPS nearly 1,000 in April and then slump for 2 months after that. But
Yeah.
I think on the whole, I think they're kind of hoping for something that's more consistently in the middle at the very least. And I think that's something that they're kind of, I'll buy them getting.
Okay. Miguel Vargas next on this list. Long term, have any of your thoughts about Miguel Vargas changed based on his struggle this season, or are you still kind of buying him as a guy who's going to be a long-term impact contributor?
I think for the most part, like it's mostly gone unchanged because he's 23 years old. It's his first real taste in the major leagues. So obviously, kind of dealt a bad hand to start the season, literally just with some of the hand injuries,
Yeah.
and having to learn a new position. Like, did I expect him to perform a little bit better? Yeah, I mean, I thought that the bat was a little bit more ready to go in terms of hitting big league pitching, and it seemed like uh, whether it be the hand, whether it be sort of his early struggles trying to take him out of what he is, it seemed like he was trying too hard to try different things,
Yeah.
and nothing was really working. So I think it was time for him to go back down to the minors, which he has, and he's performed down there. I don't know how much of a picture he has the rest of the year, just considering some of the moves the Dodgers have already made. But I mean, he's someone who's still like you're looking at being at least a contributor to a big league ball club, close to probably above league average bat, and then you're hoping that the defense at second base is still pretty solid. Like he'll be a quality contributor. I don't know if he'll be a star level player, but we'll see obviously going forward.
Okay, along the same lines, Michael Busch. And this is the most interesting one to me. And maybe this is where you can give me some insight if you have any from the organization. Um, I don't understand how the Dodgers have handled Michael Busch. This is a guy that seemingly everybody that covers prospects in the minor leagues thinks this guy is going to hit. He has hit righties. He has hit lefties. They just traded for two guys who are among the worst defensively in Major League Baseball. So if defense was the concern, like Michael Busch actually seemed to be competent at third base, I thought this year. Can you help us understand why the Dodgers have maybe handled the Michael Busch situation the way that they have and not given him the runway that many of these other prospects have gotten?
The way I see it personally is just sort of defense is still somewhat of a concern. Obviously, he actually looked better than expected at third base, but he still like barely played at the position. Like this is his first year playing it. He's kind of in a tough spot. He's kind of blocked in a lot of aspects. I mean, you look at third base. Obviously, Max Muncy's still under contract this year and has a club option for next year. We'll see what they do there. First base is clearly blocked.
Yeah.
I think them signing JD Martinez this offseason, while it stabilized their lineup, obviously that clogged up a spot that Busch could have taken. And then second base, they handed Miguel Vargas the job before the season. And now looks like they're going to try to platoon their way out of it. Their best lineup against righties is Mookie Betts at second base. So that kind of clogs up things for Michael Busch. I mean, he's had a brief run at it in the big leagues. Like it's just tough because he's performed at AAA and the stuff in majors has been kind of brief and it's hard to really evaluate much.
Yeah.
He just seems like he's a guy who kind of have to wait to see how things kind of shake out either at the deadline, either this winter, just to see how he fits, whether it be here or somewhere else going forward. He's performed. Like he's done what he's had to do. I don't know if he's someone whose teams regard pretty highly at the deadline if the Dodgers are willing to make that kind of a move, whether it be for a starter or something like that.
Do you think there's a gap between the way that the league thinks of Michael Busch and the Dodgers do, or are you saying, hey, it's just kind of coincidence how this year has played out?
I think it's coincidence how they've set things up. Part of it, I'm sure the Dodgers have done a pretty good job self-scouting for the most part.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have had some misfires when it comes to evaluating guys in their own organization, but they've done a pretty good job at that. I think it's just a matter of circumstance right now. Like they sort of looked at the last couple of months or what Max Muncy was going to provide. They extended him. this year has kind of gone okay for Max Muncy on that deal. We'll see how next year goes and what they decide to do at third base going forward. But yeah, I also Bush had not played third base yet as of last year, so they were kind of looking at going into this year. Miguel Vargas, someone they believed a lot in. They were kind of hoping maybe he could play second base, or Gavin Lux if they brought back Trey Turner. So like there was a lot of different things that were kind of bouncing in the air. And I think they weren't sure if Bush was ready yet, and obviously he's shown that he's at least mastered AAA.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, that's more than most of us could say, so I'll give him that. A couple more names real quick. Austin Barnes has been a lightning rod in the comment section of videos for us. I don't know the best way to ask this. We know what the Dodgers think of Austin Barnes, the person. We know what they think of Austin Barnes, the pitch caller. It's hard to miss the offensive production and how bad he has been compared to league average this season. And yet we know how much they value clubhouse chemistry and what an important guy he is, and they extended him. I mean, I guess the direct question that I'll ask is, do you think they've even considered moving on from Austin Barnes, or is that a non-starter still, even with the offensive line where it is?
I do think that people tend to fixate a lot on, especially on Austin Barnes for being a backup catcher. Like the impact is not huge. Like he's not the reason why they're losing games. Totally. Calling games, something like that. But I do think it's something that where the Dodgers do like appreciate what Austin Barnes has done. But I think they do look at like he has to start performing, or they have to look at their options elsewhere. Yeah. I think that if the right thing pops up for a backup catcher at the deadline, I could see them doing it. I don't think that they have that they must add a backup catcher at the deadline. Like I kind of wrote about like it's a possibility. I think I do think it's a possibility, but they, like you mentioned, like the bat can't be this bad the rest of the way, because like even last year, like he's never been like an above average offensive weapon, but even last year he showed an ability to at least bat the ball, able to run into a few. Yeah. He hasn't done that this year. Obviously, his season's kind of gone out of whack, and the throwing arm defensively is not great. The framing is kind of slipped, but the availability to really upgrade at the position is sort of the tough thing. And obviously they've got ice in the minors, but that's something that we'll see how the next couple of days shake out. But I don't know if it's necessarily likely that they move on.
Okay. One last one. I'll throw you a curveball. You mentioned Mookie Betts playing second base. I've long said that once we get to the postseason, that some of the Dodgers' flaws could actually be minimized, which is the opposite from years past. Years past, they have powered through the regular season because of their depth, because they could throw 6 starting pitchers at you, because their bench was so good, etc. And then you get to the postseason, and a lot of those advantages are minimized because, you know, who your backup catcher is doesn't really matter. Who your backup left fielder is doesn't matter as much. Who your 6th starter is doesn't matter. This year, it's kind of good news because it's like, hey, you only need to find 3.5 pitchers once you get to October. And, you know, Austin Barnes is your backup catcher. Doesn't matter once you get there. I've long said that if they were to just try and put their best lineup out there, their best lineup is still, in my opinion, the best in baseball. But it often involves Mookie Betts playing second base, maybe even shortstop, in order to get a bat there, a competent glove, and get sort of your best hitters there. Do you think there's a chance that while we haven't seen them sort of go all in on Mookie Betts playing shortstop, and I know Chris Taylor is back, which muddies it. They just traded for 2 guys who are technically sort of shortstops. We know the glove of Miguel Rojas, even if the bat continues to be among the worst in the league. Do you think there's a chance that they get to the postseason and say, all right, we're in, Mookie Betts at shortstop gives our lineup the best top to bottom offensive group. There's not a huge drop off defensively necessarily. We're just going to send it with that. Do you think there's a chance that that's what happens or no?
I don't think it's shortstop. At second base, I think we're looking at in October against a right-handed starter. Mookie Betts will be at second base, and you'll have your 3 left-handed hitting outfielders out there. And then against a lefty, Mookie Betts back out in right field. And then we'll see how they decided to play Rosario and Kike. Who goes in the infield, who goes in the outfield? Probably Kike Hernandez in the outfield. Maybe try out Ahmed Rosario at second base with Miguel Rojas, and each starter tried to go from there. I think that's what their moves are trying to kind of signal is they're going to try platoon their way through the playoffs, which They did it in 2018, and it worked. It was really effective. I mean, David Freese was incredibly good in that role.
Yeah.
I don't know if they added a David Freese level hitter against left-handed pitching, but that's sort of like the blueprint of what they're looking for. Just because that's the best way to maximize this offense, and sort of being able to maximize matchups while still obviously having bench flexibility to be able to mix and match later in games.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to the trade deadline. If anybody's watching this, these are the questions that I'm sure they're waiting for me to ask. I'll start big picture, because I don't want to ask too specific a question and miss something that is worth hearing or worth sharing. What's kind of the latest on the Dodgers? We know Giolito got traded last night. He was a guy that many people hoped. We know Lance Lynn's a name that's been connected, but what are the latest sort of rumblings on the Dodgers? You were early on Kike Hernandez. You were the first person I saw to mention him in an article as a guy that Dodgers might be interested in. So, are there any other names like that you've maybe heard the Dodgers connected to keep an eye on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Lance Lynn, like you mentioned, is someone who probably makes a lot of sense. He's someone they've talked about. I think he's someone who Dodgers are on his no trade list, but he would waive it, obviously, for a chance to contend. That's mostly leverage. Like, players use that all the time, more for leverage than it is for actually block trades, which good on the player to negotiate that into your deal.
Yeah.
So that he's someone who makes some sense just because he's a guy who can give you innings. He's someone that teams believe that there's more in there than what he's shown this season. Obviously, he's shown in the years past there's more in there. The Rays and Rangers are teams that have kind of shown interest in Lance Lynn as well, according to reports. So like that would make sense as well. Robert Murray of Fanside reported that they're interested in Joe Kelly, possibly. Obviously, that's someone that's familiar for a lot of Dodger fans. Like, I think you're going to hear a lot more things about the pitching side the rest of the way, as opposed to obviously now I think they've kind of made their moves for their right-handed bats. We'll see on a backup catcher, but really it's mostly going to be on the pitching side, I'd imagine.
We know the names that kind of folks who are just trying to read the tea leaves and looking at, well, the Cardinals are going to be sellers and the Cubs might be sellers. And are there any other names that you've heard real connection pitching wise between the Dodgers and somebody else that could be available?
Not actively, but I know in the past, like someone like Michael Lorenzen, someone they've shown interest in the past because he's someone who teams have always been kind of interested in. A guy who's that athletic, can throw that hard, and he's transitioned really well to being a starting pitcher. Obviously, I mean, he's an all-star this year. I know, obviously, the jokes and stuff came off about him being an all-star, but like he's had a quality season as a starting pitcher, and he's a guy whose stuff plays up, and he's got bullpen experience. So even if he's not someone that you envision being part of your postseason rotation, he's someone who is comfortable pitching in relief if you need to. So that's a guy who's interesting to me. Yeah, I think it's me a lot of pitching talk the next couple days.
How serious were the Dodgers about Giolito? Do you have any sense?
I'm sure they were involved. I don't get a sense like that they were necessarily close or anything like that. Just because obviously you sort of saw what the package was that he went for. Like that's the Angels' two top prospects, and obviously the Angels system isn't as deep as most, but like those are two guys who are pretty highly regarded regardless of what system they were in to be able to get not just Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez, who's got club control and is hard throwing reliever. Like the value was good value to get for both those guys, but I don't know if the Dodgers were going to go there.
Yeah. Bullpen wise, are the Dodgers the bullpen has been incredible for the last like month and a half. Guys like Yancy Almonte, he hasn't allowed a run in like 15 straight appearances or something like that. Gratterall's been pretty good. Ferguson was good, has kind of been shaky. Ryan Brazier's been nice. Like it feels like that group has kind of stabilized a little bit. Do you get the sense is bullpen on the radar of the Dodgers? Like, are they actively trying to target relievers? Are relievers just going to kind of be maybe throw-in pieces to a Lance Lynn type deal? Where are they at as far as addressing the bullpen?
Yeah, the bullpen is definitely stabilized. I think Dave Roberts kind of compared Ryan Brazier to Chris Martin almost a little bit the other day. Just sort of like that type of, all right, let's get him in, make one or two quick tweaks. Like he's a guy who's pitched in October before, and all of a sudden he's back to what he was, if not better. I think they're kind of, but like they're historically with relievers, like that's kind of what they've looked to do is try to find guys who are undervalued or guys who can be had for not much cost at all, who they believe they can kind of turn around a little bit.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's worked pretty well, especially with how much of a crapshoot bullpens can be.
Yeah.
So I think that like they're probably discussing bullpen options, but probably more in that market rather than the very top end. Because I know they haven't established like a full-time closer, but it seems like barring like some super specific scenarios where like it's all right, this line of hitters for the opponent is like the biggest spot of the game. Outside of those, it's usually gonna be Evan Phillips, I think, in the ninth at this point.
Are they expecting any of the guys on the injured list to come back as meaningful contributors? Trinan, Fireisen, Daniel Hudson, any of those guys?
I think you can hope and not expect with
Okay.
all those, because I think you're talking about two guys coming off shoulder injuries, and then you're talking about a guy who's coming off his second different knee injury in 2 years, and who got that right knee injury overcompensating for a left knee injury that he's still kind of working through. Like the
Yep.
fact that Daniel Hudson was able to finish that save is still remarkable, and obviously he's someone who's going to try to come back. He didn't need surgery, so that helps his cause for coming back. But I think once we see him on the big league mound is when he's really a part of the Dodgers' plans.
Well, and I think you buried it there. I mean, Walker Buehler's the club's closer once we get to the postseason, right? I mean, isn't that the plan? He's just going to come back throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastballs and 2-inning saves.
I think he's someone in the starting mix who like makes some sense, even if he's not necessarily stretched out for full-fledged starts and like that. But like if he is able to come back this year, I think I could envision a scenario where like the Dodgers have him as like an opener, 1 or 2 inning opener, or even 3 innings if he's able to get stretched out that much. If he's stretched out for full starts, then great. But I think 1 or 2 or 3 innings, that's something that could actually help the Dodgers as they kind of figure out, all right, who's going to start a game 2 or 3 or 4 for us. Especially after they go through the deadline. I don't think they're going into this deadline expecting Walker Buehler to be part of the rotation mix, but everything's going pretty well with his rehab. And he's someone who, even if it's just 2 or 3 innings, like if he's close to what he was before, that's still a really effective October option.
Yeah. All right. I'll end with this. We've mentioned Lance Lynn. Like, do you think what chances would you put it at that the Dodgers don't add a starting pitcher that is better than Lance Lynn? Like that Lance Lynn is kind of, maybe they get him, maybe they don't get him, but they definitely don't add a guy that you necessarily feel great. Because I've been on the pro Lance Lynn train because the Dodgers just need a guy that every 5 days is going to throw 6 innings and 4 earned runs and just to keep the bullpen alive for the next 3 months. But I do think if Lance Lynn is the best starting pitcher this team acquires, there's going to be some frustration, to put it mildly. I think within the fan base, knowing, the options outside of it, there's going to be a lot of crossing your fingers and hoping for Walker Buehler and Tony Gonsolin and these guys to kind of figure it out. What would you say are the chances that the Dodgers don't add a meaningful top 3 starting pitcher in the next 5 days?
I mean, I think that pretty much all the guys in this market right now are kind of fall into that bucket is the tough part.
Okay.
Outside big, maybe like a Marcus Stroman, but his situation is complicated because of player option, opt out. Like you don't know how that's going to impact things for clubs and for his value. So other than that, like it's a lot of guys who who either have capped ceilings or who have not come close to their usual ceilings in years past. We just kind of look at like Lance Lynn, Jack Flaherty, guys who in years past have gotten Cy Young votes who have not pitched like that this year. And there's guys like Lorenzen, like who I mentioned before, and Jordan Montgomery, who are kind of like, they are what they are. They're capable starters, guys who can help get you through. But yeah, I think it's pretty telling of the starting pitching market that although Cleveland's in a very specific scenario where they just need starting pitching on the mound like tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty telling that basically for paying off Noah Syndergaard's salary, they were able to get him to Cleveland for Ahmed Rosario, even though Rosario is having a down year. But like the fact that you're able to get something tangible for Noah Syndergaard is kind of telling of where the starting pitching market is and how many teams really need starting pitching.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can get something for Noah Syndergaard in this market, it's almost like now play that out to a guy who actually has real value as a starting pitcher that can eat innings or just be healthy, has upside, any of those things. And it's just exponentially more expensive. So we'll see what happens. Fabian, I appreciate the time. I know, as you said, this is a busy season for you. So We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the stay sane for the next 5 days. All right. Try and get some sleep, not sleeping with the phone under your bed in case something crazy happens. But you can follow Fabian's stuff. Check him out on Twitter at Fabian Ardaya. And of course, subscribe to The Athletic. Fabian, enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks. Thanks for joining us here. Make sure you subscribe here. Dodger Blue 1958. Ring the notification bell. We'll have a ton of trade deadline content coming at you, including a live trade deadline show on Monday. Enjoy the rest of your day. And as always, go Dodgers.